light up cards. Have you ever made one? Have you ever received one? Better yet, are you intimidated by one? Let me know in the comments below. I was chatting with my crafty friend the other day about the light up cards, and she said, and I quote, I remember doing one card with lights years ago, and I still have card making PTSD after it. I laughed when I read her message. The lights I'm working with today are super easy to use. All you need to do is figure out how to attach the battery. I have made light up cards in the past, and I did find them a little bit challenging. But in the end result was well worth it. The lights that I'm working with today are much simpler, and I do mean much simpler to use. I was only puzzled by how to insert the battery into whatever the main piece is called. After you add the battery, your light is ready to use. You just push the button and it lights up. That easy. So the lights that I have here are EZ lights. I mean, even the name tells you that these are super easy to use, and they are by Pear Blossom. There are multiple options available. I have a pack of single light, and there are 5 single lights in my package, so I can make 5 cards. You can pick them up on the Spellbinders website or, from other places online. Now, what prompted me to use these lights is a new collection by Dawn Walslegel for Spellbinders called Fair Winds. This is Dawn's second collection. Her debut collection, Seahorse Kisses, launched in May or June of last year, and it was a huge hit. I did a video with her collection, and I will link it in case you want to check it out. Now, the Fair Winds collection is just as amazing. As you know, I manage the Spellbinders blog, and one of my duties is to make sure that we have educational and inspirational content there on the blog. So I reached out to Dawn and I asked her to write a blog post to introduce her collection. And as I was working on adding her blog post to the blog, this sentence caught my eye. The light inside is visible and perfect for creating an interactive light up card. I did not need any more encouragement than that. And here we are creating interactive light up card. Now, I die cut all the parts and pieces off camera to save time, but I'm going to explain everything in detail as I'm assembling my card. So first, I have a background cut from Simon Says Stamp Soft Navy cardstock. I added dark purple ink blending to the top of the panel to darken it and create a little bit of variation in color. Next, I used the smallest circle die that I could find in my stash, and I die cut a circle opening. The light is going to sit behind the opening and will shine through our lighthouse, just like so. So when making a light up card, step 1 is to make a small opening for the light to shine through. For the lighthouse card, I used a die and I die cut the opening. For the sailboat card, I used a craft knife and I simply cut a small rectangular opening in my paper, just large enough for the light to show. Now, if you hide your light behind cardstock, it will not be visible. You really need to make sure that you have an opening in your cardstock for the light to shine. Next, I took my EZ light, I placed the battery inside the unit, and I tested it to make sure it worked. The unit is thick, about the thickness of regular foam adhesive square, so plan to use a layer of foam adhesive to hide the unit on your card. Now, since my unit is hidden behind my background panel, I knew I needed to adhere the panel with foam adhesive onto my card base. Sometimes, depending on the size of the die cut you're using with the light, you might be able to hide the unit behind the die cut. In this way, you'll just need to pop the die cut up on your card. But if your die cut is small or narrow, you'll just need to hide the light unit behind the entire background. For the lighthouse card, I added a layer of vellum from the back to help disguise that large circle opening. I should have cut a smaller opening. This circle was a little bit too large, but I used what I could find and it did work. It was just a little bit too big. With the vellum adhered, I placed my light and I tested it again. I find that testing things during the process is very helpful. You don't want to assemble everything only to realize that you messed something up and that your light does not work. So test, and test again. Next, I flipped the background panel to the back, and now I'm working with the back of my panel. Next, I planned the placement of the light and the switch. You need to keep in mind where the switch is, as you will need to indicate the switch on your card. so that you know where to press to turn the light on and where the recipient needs to press it to. I used washi tape to secure my unit in place. Now here I realized that the switch is not where I wanted it to be, and I repositioned my light unit. Took me a few attempts to find the switch. I tested it with a lighthouse, and again, I realized that this is not where I want the switch to be, and I repositioned it again. So for this step, it helps to use repositionable tape to be able to move the unit around until you are happy with the switch placement, and it also helps to test. Now, this is placed much better. I can finally adhere my lighthouse in place, and voila, I just need to indicate where this switch is. Now, there are stamp sets out there that have cute little messages like push here or press here. I don't have anything like that in my stash, so I needed to improvise. I figured I can add a seagull or a sentiment on my card, where the switch is, and just show the recipient where to press. Of course, this is not ideal. This is one of the ways that you can do this. It is much better when you have a card with a written sentiment or written message that says press here. So I actually went ahead and I ordered the stamp set with those sentiments, with those messages, and I have more lights coming as well, as I want to come back to these lights and these light up cards and make more light up cards, especially for Christmas. So stay tuned for that. Now for this card, I have the beautiful lighthouse made using Dawn's Gilding Light die set. And also I have a die cut the waves. Those are amazing. The detail in these is just remarkable. Dawn is always so clever with her die cuts. Now the wave die was die cut from Simon Says Stamp Audrey Blue cardstock and ink blended with Simon Says Stamp Ocean ink, and the white foam piece was die cut from regular white cardstock. The lighthouse was die cut from white. It was Nina Solar White and Poppy Field cardstock from Spellbinders, and then I also have some brushed black for the black detail. You can also use regular black, but I always prefer the brushed black cardstock. Now next I have some clouds die cut, and those were cut using Tunnel Clouds die by Vicky P from her Tunnelscape collection with Spellbinders, and the clouds here, they're framing the whole scene. Tunnelscapes is another fantastic collection that is releasing this month, and I want to come back to it and play with it some more, so stay tuned for that as well. I die cut the clouds from Simon Says Stamp Soft Navy. That's the same color cardstock as my background panel. I also used Spellbinders Indigo and Spellbinders Partly Cloudy. Each layer of clouds makes a bigger opening, creating that unique tunnel. I used my Barely Art glue to adhere the cloud layers together. And next I will use foam adhesive to add the clouds layer onto the lighthouse. Now I did add additional waves here, so I have 2 wave die cuts, and I wanted to have a look of a very stormy sea. So more waves were needed for that. To summarize, when wanting to incorporate a light up element into your card design, I would say first come up with a design. Decide which element is going to light up. Create that light up element and assemble it. And only after you have the light figured out, finish building your card. I added a layer of foam adhesive to the back of my background panel. I'm using these Spellbinders foam strips here, and I did that to adhere my panel onto the card base. I made the card base from the same soft navy cardstock so that everything matches. I don't really like using white cardstock when I have a dark background, because in that case, you can have the white show a little bit on the front, in case you adhere your background panel slightly off. I'm going to add a panel of white cardstock to the inside of my card to be able to write a message. Also, I foam mounted my clouds on top. With that done, I added a sentiment over the switch to complete my card. So you press the sentiment and the lighthouse lights up. I turned my lights off to show you how this looks in the dark, and the lights are quite bright and it shines so nicely. So this was very easy to make. The lights are indeed very easy to use. You just slide the battery in, you figure out the placement of the light and the switch, and you are done. I have one more card to share. So for this card, I have the sailboat, and the sailboat lights up. It's a daytime card, while my lighthouse was sort of like a nighttime card. This one is a daytime card. So I have a day scene, I have a beautiful ink blended background, I have a sailboat, and I have the lights incorporated into the cabin. So the cabin lights up. To create the background for this card, I use the Uncharted Waters stencil set from this collection. So this includes 6 layering stencils, and those are simply fantastic for creating a layered background. We just saw on my desk, that was my first initial test, my first initial use of the stencil. And now that I have a feel for how these are meant to be used, I'm going to ink blend a nice background. So I'm starting with stencil number 1, and all stencils are etched. There's a number etched in the corner, and that is actually very helpful because that will, believe me when I say so, will help you figure out the correct way to position your stencil. When I was first ink blending with this, with these layers, I got a little bit confused. I wasn't sure how they layer until I realized that one of the layers was flipped, and that's why I really could not layer it. So I used the Simon Says Stamp Seafoam ink. This is the positively saturated ink, and I ink blended my water using this color. I did just a little bit of ink and a very light hand. Next, I'm coming in with layer number 6, so I'm not really going in order. Instead, I want to complete my water first and then move on to the other sections. So stencil number 6 creates detail for the water, and it also lets you add the seagulls. What I have found is I prefer when I ink blend the water and the water detail using the same ink color. This way I have a very cohesive color palette, a very seamless look, I would say. And what I do is I just vary the pressure with which I apply the ink. So I went very light-handed for the water, and then I applied a little bit more pressure when I was adding the water detail. And that gave me this beautiful result. I skipped adding the seagulls. You can ink blend those if you want, but if you have the die sets from this collection, you'll be able to die cut the seagulls for your card. Next, I'm using stencil with the rocks. And for the rocks, I'm also going to use just one ink color. This is Flannel from Simon Says Stamp. And I'm once again going to vary the pressure with which I apply the ink. This time I've switched to a larger brush, so I'm using the large Spellbinders fluffy brush. I really like this particular brush if I want to have a very soft and airbrushed look on my card, and I'm using this brush to apply just a little bit of that light gray onto my background where the rocks are, and also onto my clouds. So some of the clouds are layering clouds, and I'm adding a little bit of that gray to help differentiate or separate the clouds between them. The next layer will help me create the ground, the beach, and also add a layer to the rocks. So for the rocks, once again, I'm using that same flannel color. So this is a light gray. And then for the beach, I'm going to come in with the Simon Says Stamp Latte. So I'm trying to stay, I'm trying to keep to a minimum number of ink pads. So I'm trying to use just a few ink pads. I'm not going overboard with all the different ink colors and, ink shades. You really can use just one color and get away with it to create a beautiful background. Also, what I have noticed is the size of your blending brush and the type of your blending brush matters. With some blending brushes, I'm able to pick up a ton of ink and transfer a ton of ink. But then with other blending brushes, they seem to pick up just a little bit of ink, and they seem to give you that very airy and light ink blending. So this is the type of ink blending that I wanted to have on this background. I wanted the colors to look very light. So the Spellbinders brushes actually worked really well for that, especially those big fluffy brushes. So here I have switched to yet another stencil layer, and now I'm blending the third layer for the rocks. Again, using that same flannel color, but I'm just applying more pressure. I'm using a heavier hand. I'm lifting my stencil to check if I have enough color. enough ink. Maybe I need to come in with even a heavier hand or come in with a second layer to add more color. Now I'm masking the greenery because I don't want any gray on that section. And I will come in with a Perfection ink from Simon Says Stamp to ink blend that green area. Now you are going to maybe laugh at me because I am using such a huge blending brush to ink blend such a tiny area. But honestly, guys, I really liked using this large blending brush here because it just gave me that simple, faint ink blended look. Okay, the next layer is the sky. And for the sky, I'm going to use the same color of ink, Seafoam, the same one that I used for the water. I want the sky and the water to match. I don't want to use different shades of blue. I did try that on one of my test backgrounds, and I really did not quite like that, so I'm just sticking to the same color. I am switching to the Simon Says Stamp large blending brush, and I am adding a little bit of the darker seafoam ink around the edges and also under the clouds. So this is where I want to concentrate that ink. And this pretty much finishes my background. You can see my two backgrounds side by side, my test background and the one that I just finished. And I quite like the one on the left. Now I am going back to my rocks layer, and I'm using a small blending brush and that same flannel ink to add a little bit of the darker gray here. And I'm also using a small blending brush and applying a little bit of the Perfection ink because I want to add some green at the bottom of the rocks to imitate algae. And that finishes our ink blended background with these stencils. So I quite liked using the stencils, and while I ink blended a simple daytime background, you can definitely use these to create a darker background, maybe a sunset or a sunrise. Experiment with all those funky colors. I trimmed my background to 4¼ by 5½ inches. This is going to go on the front of my card, an A2 card. I cut a slit for the light using a craft knife. I attached my light from the back using Bester craft tape. I made sure to mark this time. I used a pencil and I marked where the switch is. So my light is already attached, but before I attach my sailboat, I want to work on the rest of the card and the rest of the scene. So here I've die cut some shapes from green cardstock and also from white and gray cardstock. And these shapes can be used as both clouds and greenery. I picked this tip up from Dawn when I was reading the product description, and I thought that this was brilliant. You have a die that cuts clouds, but this can also double up as greenery for your card. That is just brilliant. So I die cut a few pieces from various shades of green. So I have the Peridot green from Spellbinders and also Green Apple from Simon Says Stamp. I layered those, and then I used the thin foam adhesive squares to add those onto my card. I am placing them so that they go outside the edge, and then I'm just using scissors to trim those to make sure that I have a nice straight cut. Going to add another grouping to the left, again using thin foam adhesive squares, and that completes my horizon line. The cloud dies are included in the set Sail Etched die set, the same die set where the boat comes from. Next, I also have some die cuts created using dies from the Gilding Light die set. So I have rocks, and I'm going to add those over my ink blended rocks. I do like the way I ink blended the rocks, but I also like the die cut look, so that's why I'm adding the die cut on top. Also, I'm adding another die cut on the right-hand side, and this one will actually just be there to cover up that incorrect horizon line, I guess that's what I'm trying to say, because I do have the greenery sort of going over the rock, and that doesn't exactly make sense because the rock is in front of the greenery. So yeah, so I'm using the die cut rock here to kind of fix that image on my card. Again, I'm using thin foam adhesive squares to add the die cuts in place. I'm just using the thin foam adhesive squares for the further rock and glue for the rock at the front. Now my sailboat has already been assembled, and in order to make this work, I die cut one of the layers for the sailboat from vellum. So if you cut it from paper, the light is now going to shine through the sailboat windows. So make sure you cut one layer from vellum. This way, when you turn the light on, it will shine through the windows nicely. So just like so. I'm using foam adhesive strips. This is the Spellbinders foam strips, and I'm just adding those behind the sailboat to add it onto my card. I also use the same foam adhesive strips to add my panel onto the card base. And now that that has been adhered, I've added my sentiment. So the sentiment reads, "Fair winds and following seas." I love this message from Dawn. She has a stamp set with some beautiful sentiments. It's called the Fair Winds Sentiment. So this was stamped in VersaFine Onyx Black ink on Nina Solar White cardstock. And then I just cut it out using the coordinating die. I'm also adding several seagulls onto my card. The seagulls were cut using brushed black, my favorite black, as you guys know. And I'm just using glue for the seagulls and thin foam adhesive squares for the sentiment. One of the seagulls on the sail of my boat indicates where the switch is, and if you press on the seagull, that's how you turn the light on. I also decided to use a marker and add some detail to the greenery. So here I'm using my Copic markers. This is the YG03 color. I will also use YG67 to add some dots, and that helps to create texture in the greenery, texture in the bushes. It just adds a little bit more of the visual interest. At first, I wasn't sure. I didn't quite like this result, but in the end, I also came back to the rocks and added some detail to the rocks using a white Jelly Roll pen, and I quite like the way that looked. So this finishes my video featuring the light up cards. I hope you'll give this idea a try. I hope you grab some lights and try and create a card that lights up. These cards really weren't that hard to make. In fact, I had quite a blast. I wasn't sure that I would enjoy the process, but really when I figured out how to add the battery, and seriously, like that was uh the hardest part. Well, when I say it was the hardest part, in reality, it was really super simple. So these lights are indeed very easy to use, and I'm glad that I used them on my cards. And now I can't wait to gift these cards to my friends and see their faces light up when I show them how to use them.